This is the E-Commerce Edge podcast with your host, Jason Greenwood. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the podcast. I have another incredible guest lined up for you today, but before I introduce him, I would love to recommend that you go and wherever you get your podcast, wherever you're listening to this on, we'd appreciate a like, a follow, a share. Share the episode with somebody you think will get something out of this. We have a back catalog of nearly 500 episodes for you to go and check out. And, like all of us, we're a little bit of the slave to the algorithm. So liking and sharing always makes a massive difference for us. You are our marketing department, so we always appreciate the support. But without further ado, it is my absolute pleasure to welcome Phil Ryan, the SVP of Strategy and Innovation at Lucidworks, to the pod. Welcome, Phil.
Thanks, Jason. Appreciate being here.
My pleasure to have you along for the ride today on this lazy Friday afternoon. It's about 4 p.m. On Friday afternoon here in Puebla City. So I appreciate you carving some time out of your day for me. I'm really looking forward to the chat.
Absolutely, yeah, me too. I've watched some of your other, listened to some of your other stuff, and I like it. So looking forward to it.
Love it. And you were saying you are now out of California, and you are in Tucson, right? Tucson, Arizona.
Yeah, Tucson is fantastic. I did not expect to love the desert, but we do. The monsoons in the summer are they are spellbinding. So we're big fans.
It's amazing. And I was looking at your hearth behind you there, and it definitely has the Spanish influence and the arches and the round. I noticed that a lot of the architecture in Arizona definitely has a distinct Spanish influence. There's no question about that. Mexican influence in many respects. A lot of hacienda style houses and design has influenced a lot of not only the housing designs, but a lot of the buildings and everything else.
Yeah, I recommend Tucson for a lot of reasons, but the architecture isn't necessarily one of them. The houses tend to have, I love the Adobe look, I really do, and the Southwest look, but all the houses basically look the same, and ours is the same. So yeah, but I do appreciate the fireplace and it is a nice aesthetic. So appreciate it.
Yeah, it's cool. Well, it certainly blends into the landscape, that's for sure. And we were out. Well, the last time I was there in Arizona for the Phoenix Open, we went out to Red Rock and Sedona, and I had never been out there before. And that drive between Phoenix and Red Rock is just absolutely stunning. And we did a little bit of walking out there in the hills, and I tell you, the landscape is just, you can see why it's called Red Rock. That's for sure.
Yeah. Sedona is just stunning. It's peerless, really, and it's amazing. We don't get out there as often as I'd like, but it's fantastic.
And I noticed we learned when we were out there and we took some photos in front of the only McDonald's in the world, as I understand it, that has a non-yellow set of arches. And that's because they weren't allowed by county ordinance to have yellow arches. So they are blue arches, that turquoise blue. They are the only McDonald's in the world that has had permission to not have the golden arches. They're blue arches in Sedona there. So that was a piece of history of Sedona that I knew nothing about until we got there. And then we're like, oh, you got to go take a picture by the blue arches of the Sedona McDonald's. So that was a fun little journey for us.
Awesome. Yeah. I did not know that, but it's good to know.
Yeah.
Next time.
Love it. Well, listen, we're not here to talk about McDonald's, and we're not here to talk about Arizona, but we are here to talk about Lucidworks. But before we jump into that and talk about the technology and what it is and what it does and everything else, why don't you tell me how you even got into this industry in the first place, this incredible, broad, deep, beautiful industry of e-commerce. What drew you into the space in the first place?
Yeah. So I've always loved, and creativity, right? So I kind of was leaning toward the computer science space. I thought I was going to be doing weapons defense systems or something because I was kind of a geek and I loved the physics. And so I figured that's what I would be doing. I did an internship with a small business startup, and I started doing business applications and kind of fell in love with that. The sort of the personal component, basically using technology to make, to achieve people's goals. So I went that direction out of school. I had an opportunity to work at the labs, Lawrence Livermore Labs, which was my dream, right, all through school. And then I decided to turn that down. Went to work in a few different areas: philanthropy, accounting, travel, basically just technology and application development in that space. And then I I sort of gravitated, I guess, toward search and just the whole information retrieval space. And the idea of taking data and making that become information and that becoming insight and, hopefully ultimately wisdom, that has sort of been the theme of my career, I think. And the tools that we have now with Gen AI and where we're going is just really exciting. And so I had an opportunity. I was kind of doing a lot of search stuff. I built a search as a service for HP, and I was working on that. And I was referencing and looking up to all these guys over at Lucidworks, right? Kind of the pioneers, and Eric Erickson and Eric Hatcher and those guys, Grant Ingersoll. And then, I had an opportunity to come and work here, and that was a really big thing for me. So I was really happy to have that opportunity. I started as a search architect, and I moved into more of a implementation strategy and architecture. And then I had an opportunity to lead field engineering at Lucidworks, which is kind of basically targeting business problems and solving those with the tools that were available, including our product, right? And then from that, I moved into more of a strategic strategy and innovation role where we're kind of trying to keep pace with this industry and where it's going, especially recently, which is a challenge. And just making sure that we're optimally positioned to take advantage of that and hopefully add the optimal amount of value there.
What an interesting journey. I did see, you've been in this sort of search, data retrieval, archiving, being able to organize structured and unstructured data. You've been in this industry for nearly 20 years now, at least as far as I can tell from your background and your LinkedIn. But it's been such an interesting journey for me because I've been in working in the e-com space this is my 25th year working in e-commerce. And what I have seen is that the enterprise search, for lack of a better term, the enterprise search space has undergone such a massive evolution. Even in the last 5 years alone, it is and then of course, latterly over the last couple of years with LLMs and everything else, the search industry there's definitely been massive amounts of consolidation. I mean, I remember back in the day when Endeca and SLI Systems and some of the major search players, I wouldn't say they've disappeared, but they've certainly, the household names of a decade ago are not the household names of today. And the other thing that I have seen happen in the industry, and I'd love your take on this, is that what used to be three separate and independent pieces of technology in the commerce stack, that being search, merchandising, and personalization, there's definitely been a merging of those concepts. And at least as far as I can tell, and there's even been a lot of mergers and acquisitions in the space to make this possible. I mean, we even look at platforms like Nosto or, other platforms that maybe started with pure personalization, and then they've realized, geez, hang on a second, we need the search data. Oh, gee, okay. Well, if we're gonna do merchandising, then we need this data, and if we're gonna do personalization, we need this data. But all three pieces of those what we're seeing historically as very independent commerce journeys, they actually inform each other, and they need to inform each other because they're really critical pieces of data all throughout the browse journey.
Yeah.
And I've just seen such incredible consolidation, and it feels like it was always a logical place where we were going to end up. Does it feel that way to you too?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a good insight. And I think that it has to, if you think about how we as people integrate or interact with information, right? And if you have like an insurance agent or something, right? He's got all of those pieces, and you expect all of those pieces from your insurance agent, right? You understand. He understands what you've got in terms of your assets, and he knows what your general goals are and that kind of thing, and he will deliver something very specific to that to give you the optimal experience. We have always needed people to make that happen, right? But as technology has advanced, and again, especially as you just alluded, like first of all, with the semantic search space, and essentially opening up the world of getting out of the keyword bag of words space and really just getting into semantics and meanings and concepts and the things that are available there, and then moving into a Gen AI space where we can actually assimilate and new interactions that are essentially that previously would not have been available to us. I think, like you said, it's a natural evolution. It's what we would have ideally been able to do before. The technology hasn't really been there. And as you said, last 5 years around the semantic space, last couple of years in the Gen AI space, it has been game changing. It is a different industry now.
Yeah, and I like to think of it, even the terminology that is used in the industry is quite different now, right? We went from these very siloed concepts to where now we're talking about product discovery, right? That's what we're really talking about in most instances. Now, as I understand it from your technology, you do some things that maybe aren't in that traditional product discovery space because you work with B2B, you work with financial services, you're working with a lot of verticals other than retail, right? And that means that, you've got a workplace tool that isn't just necessarily finding products, but it's also helping customer service, case resolution, employee search experience. Like there's more to your technology than just the pure product discovery model, but it's certainly, I feel like most search merchant personalization, they now are talking more broadly in terms of product discovery, regardless of the path or the journey or the vector someone enters one of our digital properties or the way in which they prefer to search and find things. We're trying to cater to whatever method is most comfortable to them, and we're trying to personalize from the very first page that they land on. We're trying to guide them down this path to conversion, right? And we're trying to figure out the most efficient way to do that, not only for us as brands, but also for them and what kind of
Right.
journey they want to have.
Yeah, I think that in a similar way to what we just talked about, the fact that product discovery is so dependent on so much of the context around there, right? So if you've got an awareness of support interactions with a customer, and then you can then translate that into their product discovery experience, it's a completely different experience, right? Than the one where they just go out and they say, I'm looking for a laptop, and you don't know that they've got, that they're a Mac or a PC person, right? Or whatever else that you might be trying to navigate around their personal implementation. And then just in terms of overall behaviors, right? And the way that they interact with whatever data touch points there are. And then the other thing I think that is interesting in this space is that when you've got those insights, when you're gathering those insights across the customer touch points, you can create something that is really more than the sum of its parts, right? You can then become proactive. So instead of, being a reactive, yeah, you asked me for this, here's that, looking at targeted marketing and the kinds of things that are informed by all of the things, the picture that we wouldn't have been able to build before. But now, because we have the mechanisms to gather the data at the touch points, and we also have the technology to assimilate that, we can make that experience, again, something that is proactive instead of reactive.
And how do you and Lucidworks think about two other areas that I would say aren't always addressed by search merchant personalization platforms? That is personalization of the content journey as opposed to just the product journey. So going above and beyond your standard, category page product recommendations, your standard, PDP cart recommendations with cross sells and upsells and substitutions and all that sort of stuff. But we now have this tight, let's say, correlation between the content and commerce journey combined with very, very specific first party information that we can get from customers via platforms like Jebbit or other quiz commerce platforms, where we're actually enriching the customer profile now with certain preferences, sizes, colors, all sorts of information that the customer chooses to give to us or can choose to give to us to help personalize their journey over and above the standard wisdom of the crowd personalization, which is how most search and merch platforms, they use wisdom of the crowd, technology. That's how they work. And they say, well, look, if somebody goes to this category and they go to this PDP and they go to the homepage and then they go to the cart or they add this product to their cart or they abandon or whatever it is, okay, cool. This is the right next thing to show them, right? That is likely to get them to convert. Or, okay, cool, if I got this one thing in my basket, well, 9 times out of 10, this one thing is bought with this other thing. We should probably show them this other thing, right? So there's this concept of wisdom of the crowd, and then there is personalization based on very, very specific profile properties of an individual customer.
Mhm.
And I feel like the next evolution of this industry is going to be marrying the two, where we're saying, okay, we need wisdom of the crowd, but we also, in some instances, especially if we know a specific customer's purchase history, if 85% of the products that a woman buys on my fashion website is red, Well, it's a pretty freaking good idea that she likes red, right? So I should probably show her red things preferentially, or at least heavily weight what I show her to be towards red. Or if 95% of the things she's buy is a size 10, well, I should probably show her things that I have in stock in a size 10, because she is probably going to want a size 10 unless she's shopping for a friend or shopping for her son or daughter. So I feel like search merchant personalization platforms usually take one of two tacks. Very rarely do they take both. Very rarely do they join wisdom of the crowd with deep knowledge of a specific customer and what their needs might be. And I feel like maybe that's the next evolution of the industry. What is your take on that?
Yeah, so I think you're absolutely right. I think that, first of all, first party information, as you know, is a bit of a minefield in terms of what's available and what we're allowed to use. So that's a thing, and it's different here versus in the UK, or in the EU rather. So that's a component. But you're absolutely right about the trend. And one of the things that I think there's a piece in the middle that you didn't describe that I think is really key, and that is, you've got wisdom of the crowds over here, which is, this is generally how people work. But then there are segmentations of customers that we can infer either through implicit information like IP information, or some of the other things that they would volunteer to us, that we can say, hey, you know what? I don't know about you specifically, but you sure look like a contractor versus a homeowner, or you look like you are in the Northeast versus in the Southwest. And if you're looking for boots, what you mean when you say boot or a jacket or anything along those lines, they're very dependent on geography, right? Or other segmentations. So one of the things that we've focused on in the last couple of years is, yes, wisdom of the crowds. We've been doing that, as you said, for a long time, but then taking that data and segmenting it by something that is interesting, right? So recently there was a clothing or outdoor retail shop, sports, hunting equipment, that kind of thing, and taking their data, their wisdom of the crowds, the aggregate data, and then consolidating that, aggregating that in around the NOAA regions, the weather patterns, right? And basically saying, hey, when they talk about these kinds of articles of clothing, this is what they're thinking about, right? And so that's I think there's a huge opportunity to stay away from first party data, but basically just look at, this is the information that we have noted as a group. People that look like you tend to like this thing, that behave like you tend to like these things. So that's I think an interim step. And then when you talk about very specific things, and you touched on a couple of really interesting things, right? So there are different types of preferences that emerge. So for instance, if you're looking for shoes, if you shop for shoes, you probably are pretty firm on the size, right? If you
Yeah,
wear 12
yeah.
and a half, you're not interested in 10 and a half. It doesn't matter. But if you buy Nike a lot, or if you buy black a lot, those things tend to be potentially more malleable, right? And so this notion of distinguishing fixed versus variable preferences is a really interesting space. And we've got some work that we've been doing in that space, where we're basically saying, hey, as a merchandiser, either manually or inferring this from the data patterns, you can say, hey, you know what? I want you to freeze this one. Don't change the size, right? But give them some other options. Interleave some other options here. Don't interleave 10 and a half with 12 and a half on the shoe size. But yeah, maybe interleave a little bit of Adidas with Nike. Those kinds of things I think are super interesting, because another thing, and I don't want to get too far away from your initial question, but it kind of leads me into this space, is when we think about conversion, and there's this tension, I guess, between understanding what the customer wanted and giving them exactly that, versus essentially optimizing conversion through expansion, right? So if you search for a particular brand, you want the Kohler sink that has this particular, maybe even a particular part number or something, that's a very specific ask, and we need to be able to give them that answer, right? But we have found from the data that if you narrow it down so that you're only giving them exactly what they ask for, conversion actually drops. Because what you need is that experience to say, hey, okay, here's what you asked for, but here's all these other interesting things that you might be interested in. And often we see conversion uplift just by providing a little bit of variability in that space. That was a little bit of
Well,
a of a digression, I think, from your original point. But
No, I think that's great. And I think you've really hit the nail on the head around what I have coined the danger of hyper personalization. So
Mhm.
I think we can under personalize, but I think we can over personalize too. And let me give you three examples where I see hyper personalization and the downsides of it, just exactly like you've said, which is where we can actually see conversion go down if we over personalize. And I'll give you just three examples, which is one is, let's say I'm coming to the website and I've been there before, I've shopped there before, and you know me and you know my preferences. And if we're purely using wisdom of the crowd, and you hyper personalize for me, but what happens if I've come to the website to buy for a friend or to buy for a child? So I'm now buying for someone other than me. And so
Yeah.
therefore, I'm going to give you an indication that I'm not buying for me, because if I go, for example, to the children's gifts category on a website, well, that's a pretty good indicator that I'm now shopping for a child's gift and I'm not shopping for myself, right? And so we have to be conscious of those signals. And if we're hyper personalizing down to that one person, then obviously, if I'm not shopping for myself, well, then obviously that personalization that's targeted solely at me isn't going to work. It's not going to help me convert, right? That's the first danger. I think we also run the risk of completely eliminating the concept of surprise and delight from the shopping experience.
Mhm.
And I think there's a balance to be struck between hyper personalization and exposing products and experiences to our customers that they may not even have known that they needed, or known that they wanted, or
Right.
known that they would be interested in. And I think that this is there is this danger, and exactly like you said, if we only show them exactly what they're searching for, they might not even know that we have this other thing. And
Right.
so they may not even know that we carry that other category or that other range of products or that other brand of products. And so I think there absolutely is this danger of, first of all, no surprise and delight if you hyper personalize too far, not understanding this person may not be shopping for themselves, and therefore not showing them a range of products that they would actually want to buy for somebody else. And then secondarily, not even showing them something that you carry that they don't even know that you carry. I think there is just there is this really fine line between personalization and over personalization. And is that something that you guys, that must be a really, it's like a tightrope to walk as a
Yes.
personalization platform, right?
Yes. Yeah, very aptly described. It is a double-edged sword. And that has always been one of the counter pressures, right? That we have to navigate, especially the one about, when you're buying for your nephew or whatever, we can't draw solid conclusions from any given search experience, right? It has to be in the aggregate. One of the things that I think is really interesting, and it kind of touches on what's available with Gen AI, is when you're having a shopping experience, and again, going back to like, if you look to what you expect of a salesperson, right? You don't just go up to the salesperson and say red Nike shoe or whatever, right? You say, hey, I'm looking for this. I think I want to do some cross training, and so I'm probably going to play a little basketball, but that's not the main thing or whatever. And then they ask you questions. Well, is it inside or outside basketball, and those kinds of things, right? That conversation is something that I think, and we can get into conversational search and so on, but even short of that, in the personalization space, the experience, providing the experience where the customer knows that they basically say, hey, I hear what you're asking. I hear that you're asking for this, right? And then giving them some really nice ways to interact with that experience. And it may not be an additional or refined query, or may not even be like a facet selection. It can be like for instance, you say, I'm looking for a 250 gig SSD with 32 gigs of RAM and a couple of other things, right? Just being able to say back, hey, here's some stuff based on what you said, right? And here's some things that we heard, right? You want this drive, and you want this memory, and you want whatever these other components to this solution, and then you can just offer them just a click. Is this, like up at the top, is this a preference or a must, right? Prefer or require. And then they can make some significant refinements around that. And you can also discard or disregard, right? Like, no, I don't care about that. Or you can
Or is
also,
this a
you don't have,
minimum, basically? Like
yeah,
for example, the size of an SSD, is this
exactly.
the upper bound or is this the minimum bound,
Exactly.
basically?
Perfect example. Yeah. So those little, and there's a UI component here that is so critical, right? Now that we have all of these, it's kind of like I don't know if the toddlers with a machine gun is a good app. It's not a good. Never mind. Scratch that. But we have a whole lot of power now with again semantic and Gen AI in particular, and you can squander that and still create a really bad experience if you don't get the UI right. So that's been one of the things that we're focused on as well, is how do we take the insights that are available on the back end and present them in the most seamless possible way so that they can get to the things that they are looking for, but also the things that, to your point, we want to put in front of them based on what we know about them.
And look, I think it's a very interesting point you make, because like I'm a subscriber of ChatGPT Plus or whatever their premium thing is. I use AI, I use Gemini, I use lots of different AI tools every day, and look, they're impressive. Still lots of mass hallucination out there. There's still major problems with the core data, the training data. There's problems with synthetic training data, and it's been proven to devolve. With each iteration of synthetic training data, the responses get more and more inaccurate over time. So there are still massive challenges in the AI sector, and I don't want to downplay those. But I think the next major evolution for me feels like software that I can talk to, right? And I don't mean just question and answer, which is basically how AI is today. I ask a question, you give me an answer. There is no conversation happening here. There is no follow-up questions. There is no interaction. To use your example of a sales rep, if I walk into a jewelry store, and I've used this example many times before, if I walk into a jewelry store, the person behind the counter doesn't just grab 20 things out of the counter and plunk it on the counter and start showing it to me. The first thing they do is they ask me, they say, are you shopping for yourself or for someone else today? Are you shopping for a specific occasion or event or a holiday? What's your favorite metal? What's your favorite gemstone? What's your budget? They ask, 20 questions, and then they go to the counter and they pull out 3 or 4 things that they think will meet your requirements. But that requires a two-way conversational activity to get to that point. So I'm wondering, when am I going to be able to talk to my software? When am I going to go to a website, instead of having anything in the UI, just a verbal search box when I hit that URL, and basically I'm talking to a virtual salesperson that can actually have a legitimate two-way conversation layer over the top of a traditional search merchant personalization platform before they start chucking up products to show to me. Well, I'm just wondering when we get there.
Oh, I think we're there, to be honest. Now, we've built this stuff, right? So and I get really excited about this, but you talked about hallucinations, right? And some of our earlier iterations of this, we're searching for wine or something, right? And you ask for something and they say, well, hey, try this wine. And we don't even carry that wine, or it's, something from a competitor or whatever. That's a bad idea, right? We don't want to do that. But what we've been doing is building essentially a hybrid interaction between the standard search and product results and the product information database, right? Everybody's got articles about, this is what you want. If you're looking for a canoe or for whatever, this is what you should be thinking about, or a refrigerator or whatever. So building a hybrid between that and then the actual data in your catalog, right? So we have the option of, you can come to the site and you say, hey, I'm looking for, I want a stand-up paddleboard, and it's for my nephew, and it's whatever, and he's this big or whatever. So you might have some initial information there. And then what that does is that you can then take that information and then using semantics, pull out first of all, using Gen AI, pull out the specific components, right? Well, this is the product type, and this is, maybe there's a color in there or some other dimensions in there, right? Take those pieces out and then take those features and then present them to the catalog and use semantic capabilities to bring back the stuff that's relevant. Now you've got a set of products, but to your point, there's all kinds of things that you might want to do next, right? So what we, and they may have some specific questions about, like, well, what kind of, what's the difference between this brand and that brand? What are the advantages of this type versus that type? And when you inform, and there's a danger if you just let the LLM answer from its inherent information. But what we do is we provide it in the context of whatever their product information is about, right? I mean, their non-product information, and then pull that in. So they have essentially what you described, right? Here's a list of things that you might be interested in based on what we know so far, but what else do you want to look at various types of, this particular feature, or are you interested in economics, or
Or here's, I think what needs to happen after that initial set of results is some things you might like to think about or consider as part of this purchase decision. I think that feels like that's the kind of interaction I would expect to have with a salesperson on a car lot or in a jewelry store or in a sports store, whatever. It's, oh, you might want to also think about this. It's not just the comfort. Like if it's a ski boot, for example. Okay, cool. Well, you shouldn't just be worried about whether this is comfortable or not, but you should think about, okay, does this have the right level of support that you need? Does this, for the terrain that you're going to be skiing in? And some of the questions that you need to ask yourself,
Yep.
apart from maybe the questions you initially came in and
Oh,
asked
absolutely.
me, here's some other considerations you need to think about as part of your consideration set. And I feel like we're not quite there yet in the two-way conversational
Mhm.
part of things. I feel like, sure, we can take inferences from the query, and then we can say, okay, we can do some semantic matching to the product data. But this also goes to the heart of my idea and my thinking, that is garbage in, garbage out. And that's true of traditional search merchant personalization platforms, and it's true of AI driven platforms. Like if you've got a crap product data in your product catalog and you've only got unstructured product data and you've got no attribute, no detailed attributes, no arrays, no nothing, and you've got one picture of the product, you don't have multiple pictures, you don't have videos, you don't have any spec sheets, you don't have, like, it still is limited to the data that you've actually got around the
Yeah.
products. And if you've got very limited product data, it's going to be very difficult to create a great search experience off the backside of that.
Yeah, no, it's a really good point. There's a that problem is exacerbated when you've got a multi-vendor system, right? Like if you are, I don't know if I can think of a good example, but if you're Apple, right? All the products you sell are Apple, right? And so you have full control as a company over that. But if you're looking at data that is essentially just coming from one of your 3,000 vendors, it is really rough to be able to get a good catalog with a lot of good data. And there's also a consistency problem, right? Like the different vendors, they formulate their data in different ways in terms of even just what they name the product and where they put the specs and those kinds of things. So that's a huge
And in
issue.
categorization of products, for that matter.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And the taxonomies that one vendor uses are not the ones that you use, which is still different from your classification system, which is different from your merchandising taxonomy, right? So all of those things are absolutely problems. And we have ways that will address that. But I wanted to get back to the conversation that you had, like, well, what do I need to be thinking about? And the beauty of that is that we have a lot of our clients have buying guides, right? When you're going to buy a refrigerator, this is what you should be thinking about, right? And for instance, like I've got a family, I've got 3 kids. How big of a refrigerator do I want? That kind of data tends to be in buying guides, right? And some of that data is also a little softer in the sense that it isn't as catalog dependent. It's just like, hey, if you want to do this, then you probably should be thinking about this. And those are things that you can lean a little bit more on the inherent knowledge of the LLM versus don't do anything but pull it from here, right? So I think there's a lot of opportunities. Back to the and by the way, that is part of the experience that we've built with that is, lean on the buying guides, lean on the catalog, take stuff from the query, but then also volunteer, hey, do you want to think about this? Because we can talk about that if you want to. But back to the data issue, there's another whole opportunity. I mean, one of the things that is right now, we're kind of at the cusp where Gen AI is fantastic but slow, right? And again, the more you try to put data into the system to make sure that you avoid hallucinations and those kinds of things, the more potentially problematic that can be in terms of latency. So there are opportunities, and there's a bunch of things that we're doing in that space, but meanwhile, there's so much opportunity that we could do offline at index time, right? And one of the things that we're doing is using both images as well as description data to pull out structured information, right? So, and again, it's a good thing for the multi-vendor problem where they give you a blurb and it's got some stuff in it, but it's not structured. It's certainly not structured the way your catalog is structured. But you can send all that data to an LLM and say, hey, pull this stuff out, right? And then you've got a much more structured way of looking at that data, and it does help with that problem.
Yeah, I mean, man, you that is so true. And I'll give you an example of how even just with vanilla ChatGPT, I've seen it improve just even in the last 6 months. So I live in Mexico, and a lot of the messages that our homeowners association sends to us is in images. It's like in a big poster, like a PDF of a poster, for example, right? And it's like, oh my God, like I can usually translate. I'm not fluent yet, but I can usually translate about 75% of it. But I
Mhm.
may not get the subtle nuances of
Sure.
something like that. But when I download that PDF and then I upload it to ChatGPT and I just attach it to my query and I say, can you translate this image into English for me? Or I take a screenshot of a bottle, a bottle of a sauce or something like that, and I want it to tell me what's in it or what the flavor is or what something like that. I can literally just take a snap with my camera. I can upload it to ChatGPT and I say, can you just translate this whole thing for me? Or if it's a contract, right? And I've only got an image of the contract. I don't actually have the text of the contract that I could copy and paste out into a translator. I can literally upload an image of the contract, a screenshot of the contract, and say, ChatGPT, translate this to English for me. So this multimodal concept,
Mhm.
it seems to be getting pretty powerful.
Yeah, I love how you describe that, and it's basically magic, right? I mean the the fact that we can do this right now with the kinds of things that you just described, and the multimodal component, I think is going to it's going to be an imperative. And one of the things that it shows up for us most frequently is if you're looking at tabular data,
Mm.
typically the language-based models don't tend to be very good at handling tabular data, right? Especially if the table has something weird in it where you've got, merged cells and those kinds of things. Uh, they're getting better in that space, but they're still not very good. However, if you go into a multimodal approach where you're actually just taking little snippets of the data and the level of granularity that you can get in terms of having it parse a table and figure out what the answer is to this particular cell, it's transformative in terms of what we were able to do with language models alone. And so this multimodal space, I think, again, it's going to be phenomenal in terms of its impact on the quality of things like that as well. I was going to say something else about the tabular stuff. Oh yeah, the fact that like the requirement there is that you've got each of those things. Like today, if you've got a document, you might chunk that document up into a few semantic concepts, right? And then have a vector that represents each of those concepts. And that, you might have 100 or 10, depending on how long the document is. But if you want to do something from a multimodal perspective and represent that image with vectors, now we're looking at a couple of orders of magnitude more vector storage that is required, right? And that can get expensive. It can slow things down, and some of the current tools that we have aren't as good as they are at handling smaller vectors. So that's a challenge that we have to overcome. But again, to your point, I feel like it is going to be non-negotiable as we move forward. A language-only model is going to have its place, but in the product discovery space, ultimately, that's going to be a requirement.
Yeah, because I mean, you got to work with, you might have to work with a spec sheet. You might have to work with an exploded drawing. You might have to work with a material safety data sheet. You might have to work with a CSV file. You might have to work with, I mean, the formats of data, the volume and formats of data that you're actually having to work with and retrieve meaningful information from is exploding. And historically, that has required a human being to organize that data in something like a PIM system before we
Right.
can turn that into something meaningful. But I feel like with multimodal AI, that human component will be reduced. It may not be completely eliminated, but and certainly from a validation perspective, and certainly where we're talking about things like compliance data and things like that, we're definitely going to need some human validation. But I feel like it's going to ease the process significantly of getting that data into something like a PIM system in a meaningful way that then can feed something like your system
Yeah.
to do something even more meaningful with it. When do you think we'll get to a place where a platform like yours will use agentic AI? So what I mean by that is when I log in and I authenticate on a website that I'm assigned an agent, that retains information across sessions and across interactions to where, okay, cool. Oh, hey, Jason, great to see you again. How did those boots that you bought, I remember the conversation we had a month ago about those ski boots that you were going to buy. How did those work out? Did those work out on the slopes? I noticed that you bought those. Have you had a chance to use those on the slopes yet? How did they work out? How did they feel? How did they fit? And then say, oh, and are you looking for something to complement that today or something completely different? When do you think we'll be assigned effectively an automated sales agent that runs across multiple sessions and has memory retention over time? Because that happens today with ChatGPT and Claude and everything else. But that's all a paid for service. And so I'm wondering when we get to a place where agentic AI starts to really take hold of the user experience.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I there's a whole lot of things to agentic AI, right, that are more than just the pieces that you just described there, right, in terms of the ability to give a particular model a goal and say, here's your criteria, and you need to go do this thing, right? That's agentic AI, and it like we have that stuff today happening today. But in terms of the experience that you just described, there's a couple of elements to it, right? Because there's a creepiness factor that you need to be, back to our conversation about personalization and first party data. There are some people who wouldn't like that experience, right? And it would be potential. And of course, these would all be opt-in technologies and capabilities, but still there's an element to that we need to be careful about. And then, so I think there's a couple of elements to here. There's the technology component, right? Which is, do we have the technology to, first of all, grab that data and then store it and then make the appropriate inferences out of it and then present that in a cogent, meaningful way to the conversation, to the customer. And I think all those pieces exist, right? So I don't think that the barriers are that we don't have the technology for that yet. I think there are barriers in terms of just CDP in general, right? Just the what you retain about the customer and what you're allowed to retain, but also then what is most relevant to that conversation, right? And so I think it's more of an inertial challenge than a technology challenge today. So I think that's going to happen because it makes sense, right? That's what people are ultimately going to want. How we navigate that with the legalities of first party data and opt-in technologies and so on, and then just overcoming the inertia of expectations around the customer experience. It's hard to predict that. I will say that in terms of predictions, I would have been wrong about the time frame of just about every prediction about when we will have what in the AI and the Gen AI space in the last 2 years. So I hesitate, but I think it's going to be soon. And I don't think it's a technology barrier as much as it is some of those other things that I talked about.
Totally agree. Let's talk a little bit about B2B, because this is a space that for the first three-quarters of my career, I was working almost exclusively in the B2B and B2C and DTC space. And then, latterly, I've just gone down the B2B rabbit hole and have been focusing on that exclusively really for the last 4 years. And it's such an exciting space. It's a dynamic space. I liken it to where B2C and DTC were a decade ago. And the momentum that I'm seeing, the patterns that I'm seeing are very similar to the adoption rates skyrocketing. It would be unthinkable today to start a new retail brand and not offer e-commerce. It would just be literally unthinkable. Even if you had a store estate, you would always offer e-commerce. And it's not quite there yet for B2Bs, but it's rapidly getting there to where now it's an expectation across manufacturing, wholesale distribution to offer both e-commerce, self-service e-commerce, but also punch out, e-procurement, EDI. It's all becoming pretty standard expectations in the B2B world. So we have all the same requirements that we have in the B2C world, but then we got a whole bunch more on top. And so things like restricted catalogs, things like custom pricing, things like displaying custom MOQs, custom buying increments, all the things that are really unique to the B2B world, to where on my auto suggest, my auto complete, I don't want to be showing things that customer doesn't have access to. I want to be showing them their right price list. On the SRP, I want to show them products that they have access to and that they should be seeing. I want to personalize not only at the user level, but at the account level from a search and personalization perspective. So we've got a whole lot of additional complexity in the B2B world when it comes to enterprise product discovery, so to speak. Yeah. How do you guys think about that through the B2B lens?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it is an exciting space, and you described the additional challenge as well. I think, first of all, from a like customer catalogs that's table stakes, right? Custom catalogs, right? I mean, you can't present any kind of experience that is, by the way, we have this, but you can't have it because we don't have any, you're not allowed to buy this one. So the thing is, custom catalogs have been around for years, and there are various technology solutions to make that happen. They're not very efficient, right? Custom catalogs in general tend to require a lot of data, and
Yes.
and when you're talking about, if you have, a million product updates a day, being able to keep up with that on a custom catalog level is really difficult. We've been working for the last couple of years and we have some capabilities around focusing on custom catalogs, rules, and pricing that essentially solve that problem in a much more efficient way. Now, when I say solve that problem, there's a whole bunch of aspects to that problem, right? So I don't want to, we have not cracked the entire problem from one end to the other, but we're much better than I think our competitors are at essentially saying, hey, you've got this million products and you've got these specific, here's maybe your network price, right? But you guys have a 10% discount, plus you've got these other specific prices for these vendors or whatever. Being able to map that without recreating all of the data, being able to say, hey, the intersection of this product and this customer, here's your piece of data, right? And maybe that's a price, maybe that's a binary yes, no fulfillment or not. Maybe it's a fulfillment thing, right? Is BOPUS available or not, right? Those kinds of things. That intersection is a really important component to the B2B space. And so we have been focusing on optimizing the infrastructure to be able to support that. And so we can, and from a dynamic update perspective, being able, so instead of rebuilding your whole catalog, you're just building that single piece of data. It's really basically, it might be just a float, a small numeric piece of information where that information is encoded, right? So that's the first piece, is being able to, not only fulfill the custom catalogs and entitlements efficiently, but also then being able to say, hey, we want to apply a 5% rule discount to these vendors for this customer, those kinds of things. Being able to make that external to the actual search engine index, so it can be manipulated and managed independently, I think is a great way to manage that problem. In the B2B space as well, in this, maybe more current is, and there's an evolution that we're looking at here, right? It's not happening necessarily entirely today, but it is this notion of machine customers, right? Where being able to have your website respond to a non-human entity and then fulfill those things is I think that is going to be massive. It's going to, ultimately eclipse other forms of both B2C and B2B, right? I think it's scary, and there's levels of that, right? Like from,
Goes back to agentic AI all over again. I mean,
yeah,
it's
no, it is.
one agent talking to another agent.
Exactly. Oh, that whole interaction thing, I think my mind boggles a little bit when I think about the possibilities there, but I think that's where we're going. And I think in the B2B space, that is going to be extremely relevant, right? And also in B2C, right? I think that this notion of being able to tell your personal agent, hey, I need you to shop for insurance rates. I don't like what I've got, and I think I can probably do better. And here's my cars, and and then have them go off and negotiate with other machine entities where they say, yeah, here's what we'll be able to do for you. I think that's going to become the norm rather than the exception in a few years.
Well, certainly in the B2B space, especially with e-procurement systems like, your Jaggers, your Coupas, your other e-procurement systems that are out there, or e-procurement systems that are part and parcel of an ERP system, agentic AI, I think, is going to become the norm on the buy side, which means that agentic AI has to become the norm on the sell side. Otherwise there'll be no agent for the agent on the buy side to speak to digitally. And so we've already got, we've got primitive forms of that in the form of EDI, but it's really primitive, and it's not AI driven, and it's not smart. It's a dumb pipeline for lack of a better term, and it's got a fixed format as well. And so that's where agentic AI, I think, being able, especially multimodal agentic AI, starts to really make a difference, because now we don't have these rigid data structures. We've now got very flexible data structures in the way that both in the way that I request the information, but in the way you send the information back to me, I'm going to be able to interpret that information just like a human being would,
Yes.
right? So if I was to get manual quotes from 10 different insurance companies, well, I can look at all those, and I can start to pull out the key components that are different between them just by looking at them. Well,
Yeah.
AI can do the same thing now. And I think this is, basically say, well, give me a summary of what's the same across these policies and give me a summary of what's different between these policies.
Yeah.
Well, an AI agent can now do that. And so I think that you're right. I think agentic AI is going to be pretty transformational throughout the entirety of the buying process, but it's also going to become transformative across the service process. And by that, I mean requesting a quote, downloading previous copies of previous invoices, lodging an RMA. That's all going to be automated through agents that are going to make that a whole lot easier for us to both initiate as well as manage end to end. And that's really exciting, because what it means, particularly for the B2B world, is we can meet our customers where they are instead of forcing them down paths that we want them to go down. So instead of saying, hey, stop emailing me a PO, PDF of a PO, and attaching it to an email to my sales rep, go to our website instead and place that order. Well, no, cool. We can have that email intercepted by AI, and then we can map that attachment directly into the commerce system using multimodal AI, and it'll get us in some cases 100% there, or at least 75% of the way there. And then all we've got to do is fill in a little bit more information, then boom, we're ready to go and fulfill the order. So, and there is some incredible technology out there that's already easing that process today, but the pace with which this stuff is maturing is fast, isn't it?
Yeah. Oh, it's both exhilarating and terrifying, I think. And I think what you just described, the efficiencies that are enabled, even just with a 75% accuracy rate, right? You're looking at a 4-to-1 decrease in costs there potentially. And I think we're going to do better than that, right? I think, and again, depending on the space, of course, but I think if I remember right, I think Gartner's prediction is it's not going to be until 2036, if I remember right, 2035, 36, that we're going to have like ubiquitous machine-led interactions. And if that's true, I think that's again going to be because of inertia and
And
societal and cultural things.
differences.
Yes, as opposed to technology. I think the technology is going to be there in a tenth that time. So
I agree. What's on your radar in terms of, is there anything you don't do today that your customers are asking for that you say, look, we don't do that today, but give us 6 months, we're going to be doing it? Or do you see any gaps in the market right now that you go, no, we don't play in that space, or we don't do this thing, but we see an opportunity here and we're going to run after that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, I mean, there's always things that we want to move toward, right? I think one of the trends I think that we are seeing in this space in general is just a general democratization of AI, right? And so, whereas in the past you used to go out and you find a vendor that can sort of do the things that you want, and then you do an implementation, and then you go through that process, and then you have some conversations with your UI team, and they build some stuff. That's going to go away, right? First of all, I mean, like SaaS changes a lot of that anyway, but just with respect to, if I want a RAG system, a retrieval augmented generation system that will answer these particular questions in this particular context using this particular data, the hard work there has already been done. It's in the LLM, right? What's left is plumbing. And that plumbing, there's no reason that we would have to use the former tools to build that today. And we are building the capabilities to essentially pull all those components together. Here's where your data lives. Here's the nature of your question. Here's how you want, here's some particular guardrails that you want to set up. Here's a default prompt that you might want to use that you can refine. Put all that stuff together. You do it in an hour, and now you've got a RAG system that will, solve this either internal business problem or this customer problem. That's one form of the democratization of AI that I think everybody needs to be on board and prepping for. And so we are building builders that will allow you to make that happen, right? And enhancing them as we go. I think the other thing, maybe more oriented around the e-commerce space, is the insights piece, right? And we can continue to build insights from, you look at reports or whatever, and you can see, it looks like this product is getting a lot of impressions, but not a lot of conversion, or vice versa. This thing converts every time we see it. Those kinds of things, those are decisions that can be, or modifications that are accessible to an agentic AI system, right? To basically say, here's your criteria are you need to maximize conversion and you need to push this brand and whatever. Those kinds of things then can be the domain of AI instead of a merchandiser. So we're building the interaction. Again, this is a UI component and a technology component on the back end to marry those things together. So you're not doing things that the merchandiser, you're not overriding the merchandiser, right? But you are also saying, hey, by the way, we think you should turn on these 5 things, right? So our Commerce Studio does pieces of that now, but there's so much more that we want to do in that space.
Love it. Love it. How do you guys make your money? How do you charge? Is it like a modular component based charge? Is it a query based charge? Is it a results based charge? Is it the number of SKUs in the catalog or some combination of all of the above? Because you're a SaaS platform. So at the end of the day, you gotta charge for the infrastructure, you gotta charge for the usage. There's gotta be some sort of consumption component as well. So how do you guys make your money?
Yeah, it's a great question. So we try to keep our pricing simple, and typically we have done it based on queries or documents/records, right? And that works to an extent. The nice thing about it is that it's very simple, right? Customers understand it's very predictable. Consumption-based pricing, though, is I think a direction that we have to go. First of all, before I get into that, even just query-based pricing, there's a type ahead query, right, which is dirt cheap, and then there's a RAG query, which is very expensive, right? We can't treat those things the same, right? And so we're orienting our pricing around that. But then also the consumption-based pricing is a piece I think that ultimately we're going to have to get to, and we don't have that today, but we're building pricing options around that. And the reason that, and I mean in terms of like the types of beyond like the here's how many queries we've got, there's again a counter pressure between being able to optimally price things so that we're charging our clients what they actually are using based on the cost to us versus some particular formula. And the formulas are nice and predictable, right? They can say, yeah, I'm going to make this many queries and I can control that lever. So if it gets too expensive, I'm going to turn that down versus something on our side where we're going to say, it depends on how much the LLM had to go to or how much, how many tokens your customers used when they talked to you. Those kinds of things tend to start getting less predictable for the CIO or for whoever, for the digital commerce manager or whatever. So from our pricing, what our pricing goals are essentially to combine those, to have some tiers that will allow us to basically give people the maximal capabilities at a more efficient price point, but also not get too unpredictable so that the customers are getting sticker shock at the end of the month.
Makes sense. Makes sense.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, you go.
I was just going to say that general, it's a subscription model that is essentially 3-year subscriptions typically is how we.
Makes sense. Makes sense. What's the best way to get a hold of you? I'll drop your LinkedIn link into the show notes. I'll drop your website link into the show notes. But other than that, if people want to chat to you about your technology, about where the industry is headed, what you guys do, how you do it, if they want to learn more about like what an implementation process would look like for their brand, what's the best way to get a hold of you and have a chat?
Yeah, great question. So, I mean, you can talk to me if you share my email. That's fine. And LinkedIn is obviously always an option. There's also just lucidworks.com is the site. So,
love it, love it. Now, listen, we've blown through an hour together. It's been a really enjoyable and insightful conversation for me, and I'm sure it's been incredibly insightful for my audience. So I really appreciate your time. Now, as we come to the end of our time together, this is where I get to flip the script. I get to hand the microphone over to you, let you ask me one question. Any question you like, could be personal or professional. So, Phil Ryan from Lucidworks, what is your question for me today?
So one of the things that I've been fascinated about with this conversation is your level of insight into this space, right? So, and I looked at your list of podcasts and you're all over the map. So I'm curious what your process is. Do you prepare individually for podcasts? Do you just know a whole lot of stuff so you know a little bit about everything? How does that work? What's your process?
I'm a no prep guy. And not zero prep, but like 2 minutes worth of prep usually. So I'll usually, like right before I go on with a guest, I'll go to their LinkedIn profile. I'll learn a little bit about their background, their history. If sometimes I'll already know them from the industry, but if I don't already know them, I'll sort of go to their LinkedIn. I'll have a little bit of look at their background. I'll go to their website, their technology platform website, or whatever it is, their personal website, whatever it is. Learn a little bit about what they do. Spend a couple minutes browsing around, having a quick look. Especially if it's technology I've never heard of before or never worked with before, then I'll just have a very, very quick 2-minute look. But I'm very fortunate in that I have been doing this for a really, really, really long time. I've been in this industry for so many years now, and I've worked with or touched or architected on so many different pieces of technology over the years, or implemented them as a brand or whatever, that and as a senior enterprise architect and solution architect, I've got to be able to understand technology quickly, especially on behalf of my clients. And so I've just been blessed with my career, and I've been blessed. I'm a non-developer, but I'm a really, really technical non-developer. So I can read API documentation. I speak the language of developers, even though I'm not one. I could BS and say, no, I do an hour's worth of preparation. I don't need to in most instances, because I've just been exposed to so much in my career that I can usually connect the dots in ways that some other people can't. And I consider that a gift, and I'm really grateful for that gift. And I've got the gift of the gab from my mother. My mother is an extreme extrovert, and I think I got like 80 or 90% of her genetics. So having these kind of conversations is as natural as breathing for me.
Awesome. Good answer, man.
Thank you.
Well, I enjoyed it. Thank you.
Are you a B2B or D2C e-commerce merchant? Then head over to greenwoodconsulting.net to learn how we can help you scale your business.